Welcome to Gamechangers live from Miami, Florida. My name is Sergio Tigera. I'm your host. And each and every week, we bring you someone who has been a game changer in their field and who's touched the lives of thousands to get their perspective on their journey, their mindset, their struggles and successes so that we can inspire you on your journey. So let's get started right now. And today we have a very, very special guest with us. It's Dr. Michael Platt from the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative. He's the director there at the University of Pennsylvania. Michael has extensive experience. He's been a practicing neuroscientist for over 20 years. And he's finding out the reasons, the underlying reasons why we make the decisions that we do, which impacts all of us. Every day we make decisions that accumulate to become patterns, and patterns in our life then drive behaviors and actions and our trajectory of our life. And so now as we start approaching 2020, how do we start making some better decisions, or at least the best decisions that we can for ourselves, so that we can start getting on that trajectory that we want for ourselves and our families and our careers. So I have Dr. Michael Platt here with us. Welcome, Dr. Platt. It's great to have you on.
Hey, it's great to be here, Sergio. I'm glad we could find a good Wi-Fi signal at some point somewhere in my house. So, yeah, it's really great to be able to connect with you on this podcast.
Cool. Thank you so much. So tell me a little bit about your background. Obviously, you have a bachelor's from Yale,
Yep.
and you did a bachelor's from Yale and your master's in
PhD in anthropology. So it's it's funny because although I'm a practicing neuroscientist and now I'm in a business school, I'm a professor of psychology. I have no real honest to God certification in any of those fields. So my degrees are all in anthropology, which is a study of human nature, and that's really kind of what it's all about for me, and what it's always been about, just trying to understand, what makes us tick as people, and how we can, through an understanding of that, hopefully help people to do a better job and, lead healthier, happier lives.
Yeah. And so, as we start thinking about decision making, it's obviously influenced and tainted by all of our experiences in the past, things that have happened to us. As we, decide to take an action, we're reflecting back and saying, okay, have I seen something like this before? Is this going to be positive for me or negative? You start weighing the consequences, so to speak, I guess the positive and the negative. Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah. So, I think it's really interesting right now because there has been so much focus in the media on decision making from kind of the economic point of view, right? And it's in some ways a perspective that goes back hundreds of years, but in the past 30 years or so, there's been lots and lots of really interesting work from behavioral economics, from like Danny Kahneman and Dick Thaler and other, Dan Ariely, folks who've kind of shown us that we're not as rational in our decisions as we might think. And I think that's a really important insight. But when you dig into the neuroscience, there's a couple of things that really stand out. Most of that, that rationality is not like, it's not some weird facet of psychology. It really emerges from the way our brains are built and a lot of the constraints on their function. And this is basically all happening beneath your awareness. Most of the decisions we make are happening very rapidly without our knowledge of the underlying process, and they unfold in a way that reflects those biological constraints and also reflects the kinds of decision-making challenges that people faced a long time ago before they were in a modern environment. And so, you're kind of working with a device built to solve, other kinds of challenges,
right.
And to do so in a relatively fast and efficient way given the constraints of biology. And that's what I think kind of leads to a lot of the, the difficulties that we have making decisions.
So like, in one of your videos, you mentioned, why do we grab a donut versus an apple, right? I think
Yeah,
everyone's struggling with that. I just got off a cruise. I think I'm, a few pounds over. I was
right.
thinking that same thing when I watched your video, and I said, man, it's so simple. I know I should eat right. I know I should go to the gym. Why is it so hard to make that decision?
Yeah, well, again, it's because your body and your brain evolved, and developed long time ago under conditions where uh, there wasn't so much food around us, and so
Right.
much. We have an innate drive to go for high calorie foods and to go for high fat foods because those things in the past were really important for sustaining life. Now, with food everywhere, and so much of it so calorie rich,
Yeah.
that mechanism that's in our heads can really drive us crazy because it's really hard to override.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're going against the tide here, or against the river. And so, how do you handle that? Like, what are some strategies to say, all right, I know this is happening.
Yeah,
How could we override the system, so to speak?
well, that's the billion-trillion-dollar question of behavior change, and that everybody is there's so many people working on this and trying to, and I think kind of what's happening is we're nibbling around the edges, chipping away at it, because these processes are so deeply wired into our brains that it is difficult to overcome. I mean, one of the things that there's several things that I've learned along the way. I mean, one is that we all know that it's often difficult to make a good decision and make a fast decision. And that's actually built into the system and the way our brains really make decisions. So because they kind of, our brains are weighing up evidence in the way that you might fill up buckets of, water, in order to reach a decision in essence. So that takes time. And that the bigger the bucket, the better your evidence and the more accurate your decision. But if you want to make a really quick decision, you have to have a smaller bucket in a sense. And if you do that, you're more likely to make a mistake. So, the real, one real take home message, and this is a take home message that even the behavioral economists have put out there, is to try to slow down. Do whatever you can to slow down. If you can slow down, consider your options, take a breath, you'll give yourself time to weigh up a bit more evidence and do a better job of evaluating it. So I think that's definitely one feature. Another one is the fact that we are so wired to be social. And what that means, and we're often so unaware of this, is that we're influenced by the people around us and even by people we don't know. So if you see somebody who's powerful, or who's attractive, or who's a celebrity endorsing some product, we become more likely to want to buy it. And that's not because we're dumb. It's because, again, evolution has built into our nervous system this sensitivity to what other people are doing. So we we copy people, and we're particularly attentive to people who seem to have been very successful in life, and that can be both good and bad.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, and the attachment to social media it's so powerful these days. And I have kids, and I see it happening with our kids, and my generation, or our generation, we kind of have one leg in the old day,
Yeah.
pre-technology, and then one leg in the new one. And even myself, I find it very difficult to disconnect. But when I actually do it, it's almost like a little bit of a withdrawal period.
Right.
Right, that you just don't know what to do
Yeah.
without your phone. But and then you can actually reflect and think. And I think one of the things you said in one of your talks was that you can't be hooked into technology and social media and being able to also freely think and come up with new and creative, innovative ways to do things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's for several reasons. I mean, let's face it. technologists have invented an incredible device for keeping us hooked into it. You know, it grabs our attention and it delivers small bits of reward very rapidly. And so that's what keeps us going. It's what keeps you liking away on social media, you know, chasing clickbait online. It's really, really hard to overcome and really hard to put that thing down, put down the phone, step away from the computer. I mean, you're right. One of the things that we have learned is that when you are engaged in something like that, that is routine, that's just got you pushing buttons out of habit, it's very difficult to be creative and innovative at those moments, because the systems in your brain that that allow you to be creative and innovative and explore new ideas and think outside the box, they're completely opposite to the ones that keep you focused and engaged and banging away at some habit. And when one of those systems is turned up, the other one's turned down. And in order to really kind of liberate your mind and free up your thinking, you have to disengage from whatever it is. I mean, it could be routine work, like filling out Excel spreadsheets, if that's what your job is, or it could be just habitually surfing your way through social media, which is not going to put you in a very innovative mindset.
Yeah. That's interesting. But when people are, let's say you drive the same way to work every day, right? That's a habit.
Yeah.
Puts you on autopilot,
Yeah.
so that you can actually think of other things and not have to actually worry about being completely present when you're driving, because you're just so used to getting there to work. Does that work in the same way? I mean, are we able to think about other things while we drive because of
I
this?
think that's an interesting question. So, I mean, I think there are some behaviors that are so habitual, right, that they don't really require much in the way of cognitive resources at all. And that can be a moment when you are actually totally disengaged from what you're doing, and it does allow your mind to wander. Sometimes quite, it can be quite surprising. And you say, where was the last, 2 miles of road? I don't remember driving past it, because you were so deep in your head. I mean, I think what I'm really talking about is when you're really focused on doing something that on the one hand doesn't require a lot of thought, but it requires your attention, right? So if you were, let's say, a really good example that would be doing arithmetic. Okay, so it's not that cognitively challenging. If I'm just saying, giving you numbers to add together, it's well learned. You know how to do it. You're just spitting out numbers, and when you're doing that, it does require some focus and some attention, and that's a state that that interferes with real free creative thinking.
Right. So it's kind of like the concept of when you lock on to something, you lock out other ways of thinking, right? And so in the business setting, when you are convinced that your way or your opinion is the right one, we tend to lock out the viewpoints of others, right? And not even consider them, because we're just trying to support our own argument.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that is, I'm not sure we understand exactly what that process looks like in the brain, but once it's certainly your experience, your subjective experience is that once you have committed to a particular way of thinking, it's very difficult to change that way of thinking. One of my colleagues here at Penn in the Handbrake School, Emily Falk, is doing amazing work on, and it's very relevant for behavior change. This is amazing work that tries to identify the practices and mindsets and the underlying biology that can help a person who is stuck in one of those rigid beliefs or patterns of behavior. And let's just take a health-related example, like smoking or being sedentary or eating poorly. And it's very difficult to reach those people, very difficult for them to hear the message that they need to change, and very difficult for them to implement that, right? And what Emily's finding, and she's systematically validating the underlying, our knowledge of the underlying brain mechanisms, is that practices like affirmations, which we were talking about before, and kind of kindness meditation for vivid others. And the way she puts this is that these are self-transcendent practices. So not focusing on yourself, you're focusing on somebody else or a belief or an ideal that that's important to you. And when you do that, that seems to evoke activity in a part of your brain that's really important for driving your own behavior change and for creating a sense of value in something. And it could be the value you see in eating a donut or buying a Coca-Cola, or in this case, getting off the couch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what she's shown is that those practices somehow, those affirmations and kindness meditation, self-transcendent practices, kind of turn this part of the brain on. And the more it does turn on, the more you actually hear that message, and the more likely you are to change your behavior. And it's not just changing your behavior within the confines of the experiment, like the hour that you're in there, but it's like over the next 3 months. So if you put an activity monitor on somebody and they're a sedentary person, and you say before the experiment, I want you to focus on, family, if that's your most important value. Think about your family in vivid terms in a time that your family helped you through something difficult. And now I'm going to expose you to a message that tells you why it's really important for you to start being more active, right? And what she's finding is that that turns this value part of the brain on, and the more it turns it on, the more likely people are to actually get up off the couch and move, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because one of the things that I was always taught is that we need to create a replacement picture for ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to just be replaying the old tapes. When we set a goal, not only setting it in writing, but being very specific about and very visual, and bringing feeling into it, because feeling, emotion is a huge part of a motivator, right?
Absolutely.
I met a gentleman that was about 200 pounds overweight, and his goal was to weigh, I think it was 180, for his daughter's wedding. And so that was an important enough visualization and reason to lose that weight.
Wow.
But if you don't make if you don't set a big enough goal that means something to you, then it's just you're not going to get the energy or the motivation to overcome that dominant picture of, hey, I'm just fat. I've always been fat. I'm going to stay fat. I'm just a fat kid. How do you change that that mental image? And that's so important for people, because so many people are struggling with weight loss or with self valuing themselves, their worthiness.
Absolutely. I mean, it cuts across everything. I mean, this is for physical health, it's for behavioral health, mental health as well. I mean, I think a lot of people get stuck in the mindset of, I'm a depressed person, or I'm an anxious person. I mean, sure, there's some biology to that, but it's kind of taking on the mindset, or making that your identity, right? When in fact, I think you can change that identity. We just have to figure out how to unlock that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, on the point of identity, I think a lot of people are caught up in confusing their title with who they are.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
When you kind of ask them, hey, who are you? Well, I'm the vice president at this bank. No, I'm like, who are you? Like, And so it's funny how when you change jobs, all of a sudden you realize how caught up we've been in that identity, and how that impacts our decision making, our point of view, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, and I think that I was having this conversation. When was it? Maybe yesterday with doing another podcast, and we were talking about this sort of epidemic of deaths of despair in this country, where suicides are on the rise and death due to alcoholism and drug abuse, which seem to be, related to people's loss of a sense of identity, or at least that their sole focus is on their, their economic identity rather than the other aspects of who they are as a person. And, I think that's really, it's critical to recognize and realize that there's more to a person than their job. But, we're a capitalist country, and so, jobs are important, but I think it's also really relevant for, and it's a message that has to keep getting out there, which is that you're more than your job. And those are sources of meaning in your life, and that those sources of meaning used to be the things that sustained people, I think.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was this concept that I've kind of coined, handbrake beliefs. And for this, for you to understand a little bit about what this means, is that I feel that most people have been driving around life with their handbrake on. And now, for those of you who are, let's say, under 30, maybe a handbrake is, right there in the center between the two seats in the car. And the reason why I call it that is because you can move and you can get to where you need to go with that handbrake engaged, but you're not firing on all cylinders, so to speak. You're not running at optimal efficiency and effectiveness. And I think a lot of us, whether it was intentional or not, have been raised in a way that we gave sanction to some of these beliefs that were possibly just opinions of others, right? Something your mom said one time and that just stuck with you forever. Something that somebody told you on your baseball team, or your coach, or your teacher, or experiences you've had, etc. And all that are, accumulate to become beliefs that tend to hold you back. Just like if you plant a pumpkin seed in the ground, you'll get a pumpkin. But if you plant it in a jar, it's going to come out looking like a jar, thinking that it's supposed to look that way, without even realizing it, right? And so, for those people listening out there that are looking forward to, a fantastic 2020, big goals, but they haven't reached, let's say they haven't reached all their goals this year, and they don't want to repeat that same pattern next year. What are some, I guess let's just talk about beliefs and the impact that beliefs have on your brain and neuroscience and your decisions.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the, I think, biggest and most important topics we can consider. And it's also something that is a big part of what it means to be a human being, right? Which is that our beliefs can be so powerful that we will even sacrifice our lives for a belief, right? I mean, there's no animal on the planet that will do that. So that is something that is uniquely human. That said, I mean, beliefs, the sort of the capacity to have beliefs about the world and for that to help shape and structure the decisions that you make, that is a system, a capacity that that we share with other animals. It's just that it's so much more developed, and because of language and concepts, we can enrich it in a way that it can be incredibly complicated and very powerful. But it's, just for a little bit of understanding, belief-based decision making really kind of is there in your brain and evolved as a kind of a complement to the more basic system that is a system that's driven purely by rewards and punishment. So just kind of the incremental, little bits of reinforcement you get for doing one thing versus another, and that ultimately shape and produce habits and things like that. So belief-based system is another system that comes on top of that. And belief-based system is all about forming a mental model of the world and your place within that world. And, I think that the fact that these are two interacting systems means that, this belief-based system can override ultimately habits, right? So it can circumvent those habits if we understand how to access those beliefs. And but on the other hand, there are some habits such as habitual compulsive taking of drugs and things like that that are so powerful they can override and change abuse. You know what I mean? So because, for example, drugs of abuse, whether they're cocaine or methamphetamine, directly access that habit kind of reinforcement-based system, and so for that reason can be so powerful. I don't. It's clear that as we were just saying, a belief can be so powerfully positive that it will allow you to do something amazing, right? Whether it's sailing across an unknown ocean because you believe there's a continent on the other side, or a moonshot where you believe that you believe in the engineers that they're going to get you there in that tin can. But I think the converse is equally powerful, which is that it can hold you back, right? I mean, a belief, it can, in the face of all evidence to the contrary, right? I mean, that's where we see the negative beliefs, which can be even quite pathological. So people who develop beliefs about what they look like or their own body, which can manifest in eating disorders or body dysmorphic disorders, which are very difficult to treat. And that fly in the face of reality, right? So it's like, it's fascinating, but also, really, really challenging to know, to really, I think from a medical standpoint, from a self-help standpoint, it's difficult to know how to really get into that system. If you could, that you're unlocking the secrets. And, some of the stuff we talked about earlier with regard to Emily Falk's work, and some other folks, I think that's really just starting to really crack it open in a way that we can feel very confident, right? That we understand how it works, and that if we implement it, it will work for us. We can change what we believe. We can change our behavior for good.
Right. And, I was reading a book called The Biology of Belief that tied how our beliefs are actually tied to us on a cellular level, and how a belief could actually impact us. So that could be a really interesting take. I would love to hear your take on that book. But, talking about overriding a belief, like you said, that's like unlocking the secret, right? If we could, if I can surgically say, okay, I've had the belief that I feel that I'm not worthy of receiving love. I'm not worthy of this title, or, I think that's a big issue in mental health today, is people feeling that they don't deserve something, or they're not worthy of love, or they're not worthy of success. And they tend to sabotage that, and how to override that specific belief that that you've been dealing with for a while, and you want to become very intentional about changing that belief. I guess part of that is Emily's work, and trying to figure out either.
Well, I think there's other things. I mean, there's so many people who've done really great work in the and just on the behavioral side of this, and and who work in fields like coaching, who work in in various kinds of personal help fields. The first thing is recognizing, kind of becoming aware. That's it's sort of a truism. It's a little bit trite, but that's the first step. Because if you don't have awareness, then you're just stuck in that pattern. So the first thing you have to do is become aware of it, and
also acceptance, right? It's saying, I get it. I'm not just going to just deny it and pretend it's not there, right?
Right, exactly. And I think that, one of the things I think you were hinting at before, some people just are really, really sensitive to what other people say, right? And it can really affect them in a very deep way. Whereas other people are, things wash over them, and they're relatively, their self-view, their self-identity and concept is much more impervious to outside influences. Now, that means people are on a spectrum, and it's not good to be at either, extreme.
Right.
If you're completely impervious to what other people say, immune on hearing. You know, you're the ultimate.
I'm just a sociopath, I guess.
Exactly. That's exactly right. But if you're so sensitive to what other people are saying,
Yeah,
then you're going to be depressed and anxious,
there's balance.
and unable to function. So we all want to be somewhere in that sweet spot in the middle.
And in today's world that self-image and value is determined by the number of likes you get,
Yeah.
especially it's incredibly scary, having kids and just seeing it, seeing it myself. Like I've gotten those feelings as well. You start comparing, and comparison is just the killer, right? The killer toxin, because nothing good is going to come from that.
I mean, the degree to which we now subject ourselves to social comparison, whether it's on social media or even just watching TV, you're always seeing somebody who's got more money than you. You know, when hundreds of years ago, the only people you saw in your environment were, maybe in your village, and there wasn't this extreme degree of difference across people. And it was, you pretty much saw the same people every day. Now you're seeing thousands of people who, and everybody seems to have more and to be getting, and whatever, getting more likes, etc. And, we have this social comparison mechanisms really wired into our brains, as it is for all social animals. We are all wired to, in some sense, strive for status a little bit, because it can be helpful. But that means that comparison process is difficult to avoid. And we know, I mean, we've been, this is a lot of the work that we've been doing. I mean, there are specific spots in your brain that are sensitive to your relative status to others. We don't understand so much about that, but we do know that, that's connected to, physical health, that's connected to, other aspects of success. And, it's troubling that we're really tinkering with this mechanism in a pretty powerful way and a ubiquitous way. That's everywhere.
And not knowing what the consequences are going to be.
No, we've been running this experiment on ourselves and our children for the last 15 years, and there's a
relatively short period of time.
I mean, my oldest son was like the first generation to have an iPhone, and look, there's not really good data on this, and there's not a comparison group for the experiment, but it's a pretty disturbing coincidence, the rise of anxiety,
depression
in young people, of loneliness and disconnection, and that happening hand in hand with personal digital technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so going back to, the point on decision making, as we bring this, in for a landing.
Yeah.
The locus of control, this kind of concept of having an internal or external locus of control, that either, I believe that I'm in control of my life, or that life just kind of happens to me.
Yeah.
That is every day we have a choice to decide on how we want to look at something, what we're going to do today, what kind of energy we're going to bring into the world. Tell me a little bit more about the locus of control, the fact that we are always able to have a choice. And that's tremendously important, because then we can decide, okay, are we going to go, this way, we're going to go that way, what's best for us, and how this all kind of works into decision making, because we are actually in control. It's just we have to control our thoughts. It's not always so easy.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating topic, and one that neuroscientists debate all the time, because I think that if you ask most neurobiologists about kind of will, our ability to, that we're the driver of our own train, so to speak, they would say that's sort of that is an illusion, and that it's sort of an epiphenomenon, and that basically all these things are happening at a very subconscious, even cellular level, and even though it's statistical, ultimately things just happen in our brains, and we choose things before we're aware that we're even
choosing them.
Choosing them. and which makes it very difficult to suppose that you are, that you're actually in control of the process. So on the one hand, that's the debate and where most neurobiologists come down at, but it's very hard to square that with the feeling that, subjectively, you can set an intention, when you wake up in the morning, that like, I'm going to behave this way. I am going to be more present. I'm going to, commit to my goals today in this way. It was very hard to square those. I mean, I think that at a behavioral level, at our own subjective level, that seems to be real, right? It feels very real. And we know that there are practices that you can engage in, whether that's journaling in the morning, which helps to set, or at night to set your, that this seems to change behavior. It seems to be effective, but I don't think we really understand what that means in terms of the brain. I don't know if we ever will, frankly, because that gets to the crux of it, the sort of ghost in the machine. And I don't think anybody in neuroscience would, seriously consider that there's something immaterial there, but it's, it doesn't lend itself easily to kind of, cracking that open. But as we were saying before, there are certainly behavioral practices, mindsets, intentionalities that seem to, at very least, when you engage in them, prime the decision-making system to react in a certain kind of way, right? To the information in your environment, to help set priorities and goals and values. I mean, and really what, that's in some sense, an emotional, motivational process as well. And, it's actually, once you begin to break it down that way, it's not too hard to think about how that might all really work. Right? So, you can think about the bucket filling metaphor that we talked about before. And let's say you really, and your choice is, let's say it's eating the donut or eating the, eating the apple. You can just, through sort of a, it's hard, but if you turn up the value of, fitness and health and attach that to apples, then you're going to make that apple bucket fill up faster, and you're going to be more likely to choose the apple. So we know there's a way to do that. And it makes some sense with what we know about the underlying neurobiology, but we just don't. I would not say that we know exactly where that locus of control is, other than that it seems to be there, and it seems like you can engage it, and it seems to be super important for changing and overriding, unhealthy patterns of behavior.
And so one last thing now, what's been the most, powerful tip that you can provide, or that, from your life that has brought you this, the success that you've had to reach your peak performance? Because obviously you've had a tremendous career and a lot more to go. And so what would you, what piece of advice would you leave, to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a super question, and now it's funny that I get asked to reflect on how I reached some level of performance, because I didn't feel like I was heading in that direction for a long time, as a sort of shy, anxious kid. But I think that, there's a few things, and they relate to what we've talked about. Maybe let's say there are three things. So one is respectful curiosity. So none of us knows everything, and, you can learn a lot from basically everyone, but that requires some engagement. It requires dropping your normal wariness and actually listening to somebody. So I think that is really critical. I mean, it's been important to my success because I've learned so much from other fields. What I do is amalgam of various disciplines, but that meant having to actually go out and talk to people and try to learn their language a little bit and respect what they do. So I think that's an important one. The second one is very strongly connected to that, which is connect to people. right? We know it's super important for success in life in general, both in terms of having social support, but also having connections is a really important way to get information and to get opportunities. And when you exercise your social brain like that, we know it actually, that part of your brain grows. It actually gets bigger and it gets more, it's better at its job, and it makes you better able to connect with other people. So that's two. And the third is kind of like the meathead part of performance, which is we know that being physically active is really important for the health of your body. But if there's one thing we've really learned in the last decade, is that being physically active is really important for the health of your mind and your brain. It's the number one best thing you can do to stave off dementia, to keep your memory systems intact and your ability to be flexible. And and in terms of mental health, it's as good as or superior to any drug on the market for mental health. So I know that if I don't do CrossFit in the morning, I'm going to be unhappy all day.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So respectful curiosity, connect to people, and being physically active. Those are fantastic recommendations and amazing tips from one of the leading, neuroscientists and leading experts in the field in terms of decision making and how that's affecting everything we do and even in businesses and everything. So Michael, thank you so much for being on. I've had a tremendous time here with you. I love talking about this. We can talk about this all day. But thank you for sharing everything that you have today.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on the show.
If you loved what you heard in today's episode of Game Changers, please subscribe and rate us. The lessons and the stories in these podcasts are immensely valuable, so I invite you to share them with a friend who needs to hear it. You may end up being the game changer in their life.